Thanks for making it to my talk titled Become a Speed Demon, How to Be Faster at Everything You Do in Unity. I'm Yilmaz Kiymaz. I'm from InnoGames in Hamburg, Germany, which is pretty close to here. Some of you, I imagine, have traveled further distances than I have to be here, so I won't waste any time and we'll get right to business. I have to start this talk with a fair bit of warning. This talk will be a very fast talk, faster than the ones you've seen before, so please take a moment to turn your brains up to 11. My dial is behind my left ear. If you're one of the older models, it might be behind your head, so please take a moment to do that. But don't worry, if you miss any information, all these slides, this Unity project, and all the information that I share with you today will be available at the URL that I will reveal at the end of the talk. So what do I mean by everything when I say how to be faster at everything you do in Unity? As developers and creatives, there are innumerable number of things we have to do in Unity to be able to develop our games. Day to day, these could be writing scripts, fixing bugs, creating levels, designing UI, setting up prefabs, creating animations, importing assets, making builds, building asset bundles, managing project settings, using third-party plugins, writing shaders, baking light maps, using Unity services, profiling, debugging, and even more. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time in the world to do these things. Depending on your project, your budget, and your target release date, you might have less time than you would like to work on some of these things, which is why it's so important to be fast and move fast. So important, in fact, that some people have come up with a motto: move fast and break things. I'm going to say right off the bat that I think this is a horrible motto. They started with move fast, which is really good, but then they added break things. Who wants to break things? Amateurs break things. Are any of us here amateurs? No. We're all industry professionals. So our motto is move fast. That's it. To move fast, we need a methodology. We need to know what we want to do, and we need to know how we want to do it, ideally. And then we need to look at the limiting factors that prevent us from being as fast as possible in our day-to-day workflows. So, if you know what you want to do and how you want to do it, the limiting factors are time to physically start the action, meaning for you to physically tell the computer with the input devices, keyboard, mouse, whatever, what you want it to do. And then for the computer to execute that action. And this can be referred to as the iteration time. If you don't know how you want to do something, then we need to do some discovery. And then the limiting factor becomes the time it takes you to find the information you need to continue your work. If you somehow don't know what you want to do, it's outside the scope of this presentation. I cannot help you. So let's take a look at what we can do to improve our time to action. I think it's pretty safe to say the keyboard allows us to be much faster than the mouse, right? In Unity, you might do some actions with the mouse because there is no keyboard shortcut associated with it, but we'll get to that in a moment. It follows pretty obviously that if we want to use the keyboards, we want to use as many shortcuts as possible. We also have a lot of tools at our disposal that we can use to speed up our workflows. And finally, we have automation, which allows us to completely skip the required action altogether, zeroing the time needed to take the action, basically. So let's take a look at shortcuts. I'm not going to come up here on stage and tell you about all the basic shortcuts in Unity. That'd be really boring. So for the most common ones, there are numerous videos and cheat sheets out there, but these two that I show here are the ones I like the most from Brackeys. Again, like I said, once you get the presentation at the end of the talk from the URL, you can check these out yourself. Just to name a few of my favorite shortcuts, we have new game object, which is Command-Shift-N. We have game object set active, Alt-Shift-A to toggle it. You can see over here. And then we have Command-Shift-A to add any component you want really quickly with this autocomplete menu. So, the important thing about shortcuts is that you need to accommodate your own workflow. Each one of us works with Unity a little bit differently, UI designers, developers, etc. But even among developers, and even among just yourself, day to day you work differently with Unity. So you have to make sure the shortcuts accommodate your workflow. Now, there are a ton of menu items in Unity, and let's imagine you want to use a menu item, but it doesn't have an associated shortcut. What do you do? It's no problem. You use this editor application that execute menu item API call. Let me show you an example. Let's say for some reason you find yourself going to the lighting settings for the scene a lot. A sane person, of course, would go ahead and dock this, but even then, to switch to that, you might want a shortcut. How do we do it? Here we have an example. Lighting menu item. Let's open it in Writer. Let's up the font a little bit. Is that better? So, really simple. We create an editor script, public class lighting menu item. Name of the class doesn't matter. We add one static method in there. Name of the method doesn't matter. Inside the method, we call editor application.execute menu item and pass it the string to the menu item that we want to actually execute. An important thing is then we add a menu item attribute to it. We specify a menu item path for this. Again, that doesn't matter because if we were to use this path, then it's the same as going to the path of the other menu item. The important part is the shortcut that we define at the end. And I always get confused about which symbol corresponds to which modifier key. So I end up always going to the documentation. And here for menu item, you can see it says modulo is control on Windows, command on Mac, shift is pound, and alt is ampersand. So if you go back to our script and take a look, we have command, because this is a Mac, shift L. Let's switch back to Unity, command shift L, lighting window is highlighted. And if you're really fast, then you can use tab to iterate over the elements of the UI and then change things much faster than you would with a mouse. Not everything you want to do in Unity is represented by a menu item, though. So what do you do in that case? Same thing, create an editor script, put a static method in there, put a menu item with a shortcut on it, and do whatever you want. For example, there is a menu item in Unity for making parent out of one object and making the other selected objects its children. For example, I have the event system and the slide controller selected, game object, make parent, makes the first selected object the parent, the second or the rest of the objects their children. I don't like this so much, I want a different behavior. Let's undo. And I have this make parent custom script over here. Static method, menu item with a shortcut, Command Shift Alt P. What it does is it gets the filtered selection of game objects. If there's no selection, don't do anything. Calculate a position based on the selected objects for the parent to be at. Go ahead and create the parent game object, new game object. Make sure to register an undo point so that you can undo if you thought this was a mistake. And then set the position of the parent. And for each of the game objects in the selection, set their parent using the undo.setTransformParent API so that it automatically creates undo points to the new parent. Let's see how it works. Select these two. Command Alt Shift P. We have a parent game object and the children beneath it. If we undo, we're back to normal. There's also some advanced menu item functionality that you might not know about, such as special paths, validation methods, and more. Let's take a quick look. So this page on the Unity tutorials website is about menu items. It begins with the very simple functionality that we already talked about, but then goes on to some interesting stuff, which is such as special paths. So if in the string that you pass to the menu item attribute, you started with assets, then you have the chance to place your menu item not up top here, but in the assets, which is in the project view here, or when you right-click here. If you say assets create, then it will be under the create menu over here. If you use context, this is really interesting, you can put it on the right-click menu of a component. So I have an example here. I have my slides. To achieve this functionality of showing one thing at a time, I specify these game objects on my slide object over here. You can see I have two text elements specified so that we can step over them. But if we wanted to do it automatically, so you don't have to drag everything in, excuse me, one by one, I added a context menu item here, gather text elements, and it will automatically populate it. So you can really speed up your workflow, your very specific workflow, as you can see in my case, with such functionality. So next thing I want to talk about is for developers, IDE shortcuts. We all love and usually swear by our own IDEs, be it Visual Studio, Visual Code, JetBrains Rider, MonoDevelop, what have you. The thing that's important is that you customize to hell and back. Because we spend a lot of our time there, we spend a lot of time writing code, but none of us enjoy writing boilerplate code or code that we think the computer could write for us. So I swear by JetBrains Rider. It really accommodates speed demons, and it has great integration with Unity that's getting better each day. I'm not affiliated with them, just love the product. But let me just show you a couple examples. So imagine in the slide class, we wanted to give this whole project an enterprise architecture. So we wanted to extract an interface out of it. We can hit Command-Shift-R, extract interface, hit enter, there's the interface. If we don't like interfaces being in the same file as classes, Command-Shift-R, move to another file, done. This is just one really quick example. So in Writer, I actually want to undo this, or not save it at least. Alt-Enter and Command-Shift-R are really good. If you go into the Preferences in the key map section, you can see there are a ton of different actions in Writer that can be associated with shortcuts, and you can change these however you like. Let's take a moment to compare this with the options Unity offers you in Preferences. Not great. So definitely customize your IDE. One other thing I will mention is live templates. So when writing code in Unity, you might use certain APIs a lot, debug log, for example. Instead of typing debug log all the time, even if you can do debug dot and then log will be the first one and you hit enter, you can even be faster. You can create live templates. So here's one I've created called log equals debug.log with an open parenthesis. If I just go here in a method, type log and hit tab, automatically completes the debug log. Seems like a small improvement. In the long term, it saves you a lot of time, especially if you take the time to do a lot of these things. The next thing are tools. So obviously, Unity comes with a lot of tools. New ones are getting each day. We heard of some new ones yesterday. There are also third-party tools. Maybe you heard of this thing called the Asset Store. The thing about the Asset Store is you have to be really picky with the assets you choose from there. I will get to that in a minute. But nothing really beats writing your own tools. So it's a really important skill to have, being able to write your own tools. And we'll get to why in a second. So Unity tools. Yesterday, there was a session about Cinemachine and Timeline. You might have seen it. Great for improving your workflow with cameras and animation, but also a lot of other things. And similar packages like this are being worked on by Unity and developed and released. And you can see some of them in the package manager. So I think this is new since 2017, some version. You can correct me later if I'm wrong. In this project, I have the incremental compiler, which some of you might not have heard about. We'll get to that in a bit. And I have TextMesh Pro, which is powering all the text you're seeing in the presentation. But if we go to the old section, you can see Cinemachine is there. The new entity system is there. High-definition render pipeline is there. And a lot of other things you might not have heard of are listed here, and you can put them in your project. Definitely check it out. Next up is the Unity GitHub profile. So not everything Unity is working on at this moment is visible in the package manager, because it gets there when they get to a point where they can do a release or a pre-release, experimental release as they call it. So some things are on the Unity GitHub profile. Let's take a look there. So they have a ton of repositories on here. It says 224. If we change the type to sources, no, it's still the same. Oh, 126 results. And I'll just show you one example. Tools collection. Repositories use together all the little editor script and tools that we write for different projects, they say. So just a few examples. Reference Finder could be quite handy. Missing Scripts Finder, you might have noticed you need this from time to time. Package Manager, Package Designer, Preset Importer. So definitely take your time to take a look through the GitHub repository of Unity. Very useful stuff in there. And finally, the Unity blog. So the blog has gotten better and better each year, in my opinion, in showcasing the new things that Unity are working on. Definitely check it out. Better yet, subscribe to it with an RSS reader. And there are also some brand new tools we heard about yesterday at the keynote that I'm very excited about. Kinematica, which looks like Blackmagic. Nested Prefabs, anyone? And the SVG importer. These are all super interesting to me, and I can't wait to play with them. And the thing about it is, usually these new packages replace your existing workflows with much faster ones, so it saves you time in developing your games. So give them a look. Some noteworthy third-party tools, that I want to mention. SR Debugger. I use this a lot nowadays because we're doing some prototypes. I can trigger it by tapping here, I hope. Let's give it another try. Exit play mode. Enter play mode. Free aspect. There it is. It's an in-game console and a profiler. Well, not really a profiler, but it shows you what your game is doing. So here's the console. Nothing in here right now. Let me log something. There it is. It's really useful if you're especially working for building for mobile devices to be able to have an in-game console that you can trigger with some hidden button or something that you can actually disable in your release builds to see what's going on, because it really improves your iteration time. This options section is great for specifying custom debug actions you might want to do. So in one of my prototypes, I have this filled with graphics options because I'm testing the impact of different graphics features on performance. So here I just have this log time since start, which is just a method, and performance toggle between normal and high, which sets the target frame rate to 30 and 60, which doesn't do anything in the editor, so it's boring, I know, but let me show you what the code looks like. SR options custom. It really takes very little code to put something in there, which is what I think is really great about it. You can specify a category if you want, then it will put this category there. Just make a method, it will show up as a button. Make a public property, specify your own enum if you want to give it a nice name, and then do whatever you want in there. I set the application target frame rate to the value we receive, which is either 30 or 60. And the other thing that's really cool is you can go to the profiler, pin it, go to the options, pin some options that you're interested in toggling on and off right now, and then you can see it as you're playing your game. You can toggle between the different options and see how it's affecting your game, for example. All right, let's get that out of the way. Another tool I want to mention is haste. So Mac users probably know Spotlight. Hit Command-Shift or whatever shortcut you might have changed it to, and then you can search for whatever you want, right? Be it applications, files, anything. On Windows, you have the search functionality is pretty much the same nowadays. Haste is pretty much Spotlight for Mac, for Unity, sorry. Hit Command-K, and this window comes up. It says just type. So let's say I want to go to some prefab that I have, .prefab. There it is. I can go to it, select it, drag it into the view. Or if I want to go to my scene, ends with .unity, main.unity, hit Command down, open the scene, much faster. One thing that's bad about this is, as far as I know, this tool is no longer being developed. I can imagine so many different features being added to this. Like, for example, you find the prefab you want, and then you put a space and type instantiate or some short word for it, and it immediately puts it into the scene, and you're just that much faster. So this is a really great opportunity if somebody wants to work on this. Another tool I want to mention is Unity REPL. REPL stands for Read, Evaluate, Print Loop, I think, that I like to use for one-off code that I want to run. So Command-Shift-R brings up this interactive C# shell, and then there I can write some code when I want to execute something, but I don't want the hassle of saving it to a file. Because if I go to Writer, create a file, write the code, come back to Unity, let it compile, execute the menu item, it just takes too long. So here's one example. Sometimes it's useful to find the GUID of some asset. So we can write, let me try to zoom in here a little bit, var GUID. Wait, first we need the path. Asset database dot get asset path. So it doesn't have autocomplete, so you need to have a good understanding of the API, and this probably won't compile, but let's try. Selection.active object. And then GUID, asset database, path, database, path to GUID, path, and not working. Anyways, this tool is also not being developed nowadays as far as I know, but imagine this tool had autocomplete functionality and you could write your one-off code in such a window, how much faster you would be in doing this one-off actions you have to do in Unity. Bad example, right? Let's move on. Writing your own tools. Very, very important. It can't be overstated how important it is to write your own tools, and the Unity editor is insanely extensible. So just a shameless plug, I have a couple Unite talks from previous years where I talked about advanced editor scripting, but you will find much more up-to-date ones if you just go on YouTube and search for editor scripting. I recommend you do it. The editor is insanely extensible. It's one of the better strengths of Unity, I find, but you got to choose the right method of extending the editor. So you might be writing a custom editor, which overrides how the component draws itself in the inspector. An editor window that's just like any other window that we use in Unity, such as the project window. Initialize on load lets you initialize some script or some class as soon as Unity starts, so you can do things in the background. Or something like on-scene GUI, which lets you draw scene controls, which I actually have in this presentation. If I can zoom in here, you can see these buttons. Do you see them? They're drawn in the scene, they're really hidden. I set the opacity really low. But they also let me go through the presentation. But then later I realized I'm never going to use those buttons, so I just kind of hid them away, and I just use the left and right arrow keys, and also the clicker sends page up and page down key codes to the editor, so I use those instead. Getting back to play mode. All right. Automation. There are a lot of tools at our disposal to automate things in Unity. One of those that I like the most is asset pre- and post-processors. So when you bring assets into Unity, audio, textures, models, etc., there are a ton of import settings that you can set up, and they really impact the performance of your game. So it's really important to set the right settings, and it's important to not forget which settings to set. So this is where this API comes in really handy, that you can automate this process. So here I have a very simple example. Under scripts editor, I have texture preprocessor. Since this is a presentation that's not going to be deployed to a device, I don't care about texture compression. So anytime I set one of my textures type to sprite, I want texture compression to be just uncompressed. Let's take a look at an example. I have an image here. If it's a default texture type, I can set the compression, no problem. But if I set it to sprite, this texture preprocessor will automatically set the compression to none, so I don't have to worry about it. Small things, they add up. Another one is serialization callbacks. Let's take a look at those. Here we have this page from the documentation. Gives an example of serializing dictionaries into lists of keys and values, which I'm sure most of you have seen before. But it's a hassle if you have to serialize and deserialize two lists, and then you have to worry about, oh, do they match up really? Just use a dictionary, use the serialization callbacks to handle it seamlessly. Editor application callbacks are really important. I showed you on-scene GUI. There are more. So hierarchy changed, project changed. These are really important callbacks, kind of global callbacks. So on receiving them, you don't want to do something super expensive, but they're great for really changing the behavior of Unity and really modifying the editor to how you want it to work. Another one is onValidate, which will get called on a component anytime you change any of its values, which is great for validating that the value ranges are correct and any other custom functionality you might want. And post-process build attribute is, of course, great when you make a build. If you want to post-process it in Xcode or change some files, also a good one. So we covered the things we can do to improve our time to action. Let's talk about the time to compute. It might be tempting to think that we can't have much influence here. Your computer is fast as it is, and you can't do anything about how long it will take to compress a texture. But there are some methods we can use. First one is avoiding the computation altogether. Second one is delaying the computation to a more appropriate time, speeding up the computation somehow, and changing our approach completely. So when it comes to avoiding something, we can avoid texture import times. How? Use the cache server. You guys probably all know the cache server. There's a new version out there, I think version 6 or something, that's really great for land-based. If you're working at a big company, having a cache server that caches all the assets is wonderful. We had this in our project where when you switch to a platform such as iOS and Android and that ETC and PVRT compression kicks in, you're losing a lot of time. Another one is delaying. So if you want to open a new project and the default target platform is a mobile platform and the texture compression is going to kick in, you're going to sit there waiting for the whole project to open. So you could just beforehand open an empty project or any other project you have, go into settings, change the setting, compress assets on import to false, so that you don't have to worry about this. Because in most cases, you don't need to see the compressed versions of the assets when you open a new project. Another option is speeding up compilation times. This is a big pain point for me. As your project grows and as you add more code to your project, your compilation times go up, obviously. And as you add third-party packages as well. So I really try hard to minimize this. So what we would do, or we could do, still can, but there are better methods, back in the day, is put some code in the plugins folder. Because the code in the plugins folder gets compiled to a different assembly, and if you change your game code but don't change code in this plugins folder, then that code won't be recompiled and contribute to your recompilation time. You can also use DLLs, which is a bit cumbersome. But nowadays we have this new feature called assembly definition files, where you can specify which scripts should be in which assembly, and then the scripts you change will only be compiled with the other scripts in that assembly to speed up compilation times. Another thing is the incremental compiler, which you saw when I opened the package manager. It's in preview. I think I've had Unity crash a few times because of this, but you can see It's a ROSM-based incremental compiler. They upgrade the compiler. It only tries to compile the minimum amount of code necessary based on your changes, so the compilation times are really fast. And you can keep track of your compilation times with the tool called Compile Time Tracker, which I have here. Let's take a look. Let's go to a script, import it to trigger a script recompilation, go to the console, wait a bit. Compilation finished in 5.89 seconds. Using this, you can really keep track of how the script recompilation time of your project grows over time. It has a little window, Compile Time Tracker, shows you a log of the compile times today and from yesterday, and gives you an option to export it to comma-separated value file, which you can then use some graphing library to graph if you wanted to. I plan to do that for my project soon. And the final approach we can take is to change our approach completely to something. So for example, if you're really tired of script recompilation times, you could imagine changing your approach to scripting. Are you tired of script recompilation times? Are you fed up with garbage collector spikes? Have you ever considered scripting in C++? It is possible. This really genius guy, Jackson Dunstan, has released a package on GitHub called Unity Native Scripting. Let's take a look. The library will allow you to write Unity scripts in native code, C, C++, assembly. And the goals are making scripting in C++ as easy as C#, low performance overhead, easy integration with any Unity project, fast compile times, and not losing support from Unity. You could take a look at this. It's not going to be right for every project. Some big project might consider this. If you have a team of developers that are more comfortable in C++ and managing their own memory, you could take a look at this. It is a serious thing to consider whether you want to use this in your project, but it promises really good things, like not having to deal with the garbage collector and having total control, no IL to CPP surprises, etc. Something to keep in mind, something to check out. So now we get to improving our time to information. As developers, we have to go to the documentation a lot, right? Unity has grown so much that we can't keep the whole API inside of our heads. So we have to keep going to the documentation every once in a while. And if we want to do that using a web browser, we go to docs.unity3d.com, wait for it to load, go to scripting API, search for something we want, menu item, wait for it to load. I'm already really bored. Click again, wait for it to load, and then read. Instead, use a local documentation browser. I have Dash on Mac, menu item, I already have it here. Let's search for something else. Asset database, I'm already there, and I can read the documentation that I was looking for really quickly. There are equivalents of this app on Windows. One is Velocity, one is Zeal. They all use the same doc sets. There are a ton of different doc sets you can download for these. Users can contribute their own doc sets. You can have cheat sheets. It's really great. Make sure to take a look into it. Searching the internet. Nowadays, when we run into a problem, first thing we do, we Google it. If it's a really tricky problem, the answer might not necessarily be on Google. Might be on Stack. I mean, you might not be able to find it so easily. Sometimes it's not there at all. So at that point, you have to ask other people. When it comes to asking other people, you have to choose the right communication channel. I like to use Twitter a lot because it has a very high rate of communication. But you got to find the thing that works for you. You got to find where your network is so that you can ask these people and get the information that's inside of their heads. And the final thing you can do is having the information come to you. So this isn't a direct approach. This is more of an investment that pays off in the long term. But instead of always having to go and look for information, make sure to sign up to some really good sources of information with an RSS reader or whatever you want, and then have that information come to you. Read the good articles, have that information in your head, so that the next time you run into a problem, you don't have to go searching for it again. Let's recap. We talked about improving our time to action with shortcuts, tools, and automation. We talked about the time it takes for the computer to execute the action and how we can improve ourselves and our speed with avoiding it, delaying it, speeding it up, and changing our method. And finally, time to information, documentation, search, people, and subscribing to good sources of information. Thank you very much. This is the link that I promised you. This whole project that I'm doing the presentation in is available there, along with a README file that kind of succinctly tells you what all the information that I've given you today. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, please come up to the microphones. Let's start here, yeah.
Hello. Hello. Okay, so as a Unity project grows, the amount of time between when you press the play button and actually being able to play it grows incrementally.
Definitely.
Okay, so looking at the Unity source code, I noticed that when you press play, it backs up the entire scene, replaces it with a copy of that, so it messes around with it.
Right.
And when you press stop, it replaces the backup scene to the original one. Right. Currently, there's no method for Unity to just work out which bits of the scene it could bypass backing up. So do a smart backup, and then just put the dynamic ones in there. I've written a script to actually make a temporary scene to unload the stuff that you know that's definitely not going to change, like static objects, like buildings, rocks, this sort of stuff. Put in another scene, and then you can sort of play the game, and then sort of unload those stuff back into a temporary scene. So basically, it stops backing up the stuff it doesn't need to back up. Because I had a project where, like on an i7 laptop, it was taking about 2.5 minutes to play.
Really?
Shortcuts are great, but
2.5 minutes?
2.5 minutes
Wow.
between play and actually playing the game. That's where all the time went when I was there. Yeah.
So you use this approach of a minimal scene to enter play mode with?
Yeah, that's right, but I only invented that sort of recently. Now, is there any Unity going to do anything to help people profile the amount of time we press play and actually playing the game? Because
there is.
That is where it's all the time's going down the drain.
The question is how to improve the time it takes to enter play mode, in case it wasn't audible. I remember reading an article about how to profile the time it takes to enter play mode. I don't have it ready here, but if you search, profiling play mode Unity, I'm sure you will come across it. I haven't done much investigation into that area myself, but I feel your pain. I know how it can be. Thank you.
Do you profile your editor tools in any way? Profiling.
Profile them. Of course. So if you write really simple editor tools, editor windows, you don't necessarily need to profile them because you won't feel any delay. But as your editor tools get more and more complex and you do a lot of computations in there, you will want to profile it.
How do you do it?
Sorry?
How do you do it? Just
how do I do it? You can profile the editor, right? So if you go to the profiler, there's this button for profile editor, and then you execute some action, you look there, and you can see what's happening.
And you showed editor scripting too?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I've started using assembly definition files, and I've come across some issues when it comes to external packages. So once you put an external package into its own assembly, you'll also have to put every single editor folder into its own assembly.
I've heard of this.
And then they reference each other, so you have to restructure the hierarchy of the scripts of every external dependency to get this running. I was wondering if you had some tooling or ideas for that.
I don't, unfortunately. So assembly definition files are relatively new.
I know.
I haven't had a chance to use them yet because my project at the moment hasn't grown to that size. But I know that maybe you talk to one of the Unity experts, set up a time with them, and then they might be able to give you some tips on how to deal with this.
Thanks, will do.
Thank you.
Hello. Can you tell us to which RSS feeds you are subscribed to?
Sure. I hope there isn't anything inappropriate in there. Let's take a quick look. So, we have Alan Zacconi, which I met like 1 hour ago on the conference floor. His tutorials on Unity are absolutely amazing. Let's see all articles. I would highly recommend you follow it. Another one, I think I have some Unity-related ones here. Keijiro is a Japanese Unity developer, as far as I know. He does amazing Unity graphics-related projects. You'll find lots of inspiration here, lots of bleeding-edge graphics prototypes. I subscribe to the Unity roadmap, which tells me whenever they change the planning status of a feature, for example, PhysX 3.4 version change, I can see that they plan to put PhysX 3.4 in Unity 2018.3, which is very useful. And a bunch more. So actually, my last year's Unite talk was about being a resourceful developer. If you check that out, you will see me talk more about which sources I subscribe to.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.